I love so many things about North Dakota, and one of the things I love the best is how anxious we are to help one another. You see it all the time. You've seen the traffic jams at entryways when you're trying to go into a restaurant or a building as people stop to hold the doors open for one another. If you've ever stopped alongside one of our roads to take a picture or a phone call or to change a tire, you've probably had multiple people stop just to make sure you don't need any help. Another way North Dakotans can show kindness to their neighbors is by getting vaccinated. Vaccinations keep vulnerable people safe from severe illness and death. They keep our economy running by keeping our businesses open. They help us stay mentally healthy by allowing us to connect with others through church events or community groups. They also keep our healthcare workers safe and on the job. Getting vaccinated is a choice you can make to help your neighbors, your community, and your state. So talk to your doctor about it and follow their advice to get the vaccinations that will help keep you and all the people you care about healthy and happy. To learn more, go to spreadlovenotcovidnd.org, a website set up by the North Dakota State University Center for Immunization Research and Education.
Get 3 months of local news for just 99 cents a month. You'll get unlimited access to the news you need to stay engaged and connected to your community. Visit inforum.com/subscribe now to get 3 months of local news for only 99 cents a month.
Welcome to Plain Talk, and first of all, I got to introduce. We have a new, I have a new co-host for Wednesdays, Ben Hanson, who is a former state representative. Recently, was also a candidate for the Cass County Commission, and he's going to be joining on. He's got a wealth of experience in the legislature and knows a lot, and is also left of center. So he's ideologically opposite from me, and I think we're going to have a good time. My Chad replacement, Ben, welcome. Thanks for being on.
Thanks so much for having me on. Looking forward to it.
And I also have to apologize in advance. I know my voice sounds horrible. I haven't been sick since COVID, and apparently Mother Nature has decided to punish me for all of that time where I went without getting the flu, and I got it all at once here. So if I sound horrendous, it's not whatever device you're listening to this on. It's me. I'm the problem. Hey, today, the legislature's been down in Bismarck for the week. They're doing their organizational session. All the new lawmakers come down. They get sworn in. They go through orientation. We'll talk with Ben about that a little bit in the second half of the show, what it's like to be a freshman lawmaker and go through that experience. But before we get to that, our guest is Governor Doug Burgum, who today actually gave his budget address to the legislature. Now, for those of you who don't follow this stuff maybe as closely as we do, essentially what happens is the governor has what's called an executive budget, which is the governor's recommendations for what his plan for the budget. That then goes to the lawmakers. They obviously are going to make all sorts of amendments. There's lots of debate. And then at the end of it, it goes back to the governor for a signature. So today was the governor basically telling the legislature, these are the priorities that I would like to see come out. And he's here to join us to talk about that proposal. Governor, welcome. Thanks for being on.
Great to be with you, Rob, and welcome, Ben.
We the first thing I wanted to ask you was that the headline that came out. I know our Jeremy Turley. The headline was that this was a record budget, but I know one point that you stressed, and particularly in the release you sent out today, was that in terms of general fund spending, this budget is actually a bit below where the general fund spending was when you took office in December 2016. Talk about that a little bit. Like, there's obviously some increase in spending going on here, but it's a little bit complicated because we have general fund spending, then we have spending that comes directly out of special funds like the SIF fund or some of these others, and then we also have federal money that comes down from Washington, D.C. and gets run through our budget and appropriated here in the state. So talk a little bit about that headline, record budget versus the nuts and bolts of general fund spending versus special fund spending, et cetera.
Happy to dive into all those mechanics, Rob, but let me step back first of all and also just say that sometimes it's referred to as the governor's budget. I think more appropriately it's the executive budget recommendation, because this is a huge team effort to produce this budget, which runs hundreds and hundreds of pages in enormous acute detail. Is a process that started really over 12 months ago. When Brett Sanford and I got into office, one of the things we understood was hey, there's a budgeting process in state government, and that budgeting process is part of how the mechanics of administration work. Legislature, sets the budgets, helps design the policies, but then the team members of the state of North Dakota have to go work executing on those programs and those activities across a wide range of things that touch every citizen. I mean, from public safety to education to healthcare to roads and bridges and game and fish and parks and rec and state libraries. I mean, so the breadth of what all goes into the budget is really significant. But in that budgeting process, if it is really about, hey, if an agency and they're all silos and they all say, hey, if we get a larger budget, we're winners, and if we get a smaller budget, then we're not winners. That can be kind of a predominant culture. We've worked really hard the last 6 years to say, look, we have an issue like called workforce, or the issue is, the disease of addiction and how that affects our criminal justice system. Then those issues cut across all of these silos. So we, in the silos of government, that each one of those silos would be defined by an organization that has their own budget that they have to report on. So the system of budgeting sort of drives people towards silos, and we've been trying to really drive towards strategies. So we've implemented, starting 6 years ago, a strategic process that drives, so strategies drive budget, not the other way around. We held 75 meetings with every elected official in their agency, all the cabinet leaders that report directly in to the governor's office, which is over 20, all the North Dakota Industrial Commission agencies, and then, smaller agencies like the state library or the state forester or others that still play very important roles in our state. And human services, that could have been an 8 to 10 hour long meeting. Higher education, extension service, all those tend to be long, big organizations, big budgets, and the small ones we might have met with for 1 to 2 hours, but 75 meetings. And then, Joe Morissette leads OMB, the human resources team, Sean Riley and the IT team, Tammy Miller, the chief operating officer out of our office for the state of North Dakota. All of those folks sat in, and myself in all of those meetings. And so we really feel like, we have a constitutional duty to deliver to the legislature an executive budget that represents the best thinking that we have that give them the greatest starting point possible. And so that's the work that goes in. So it's when the legislature's not here, we're really driving a process that says, how do we cut red tape? How do we become more efficient? How do we cut across all these silos? And so that's what's been delivered. Your question specifically about general versus special funds is insightful and timely. So appreciate the question. There have been over time, as there are in any large organizations, things in the accounting system that get designed, and particularly when that accounting system interacts with politics, to in some cases then try to manage what have been the ups and downs of a commodity-based economy, where this is a state where sometimes we have lots of revenue and sometimes we have less. So one of the budgeting challenges is, how do we address that? I would say that, we on the executive branch believe that if we've got all of the appropriate reserves in place, which we do, budget stabilization fund that covers the general fund, we've got the foundation aid stabilization funds for K-12. If we have all these reserves in place, then we can and should be more transparent, because there is a one very large additional fund called the Strategic Investment and Improvement Fund, which was converted from a name I understand it used to be predated the Legacy Fund, but it was meant to be a place when the oil industry was just starting to kind of have some oil dollars go. But now with the Legacy Fund being created, by the public, 30% of the oil tax revenues right off the top going to the Legacy Fund. The principal can't be touched. The earnings, then flow into the general fund. But things like the Strategic Investment Improvement Fund, or SIF, really may not be necessary. I mean, and which you're referring to as special funds, because it is really like a second checking account that ends up. And where my concern is if one is sort of transparency to both public and the legislators, but the second is if we have too much cash in too many different cream cans parked all over the place, then we're not doing a good cash management. And you can get by during the periods in the last 5 years when you had chronically and historically low interest rates. Having money in a checking account that's not earning much maybe isn't costing you. But if you're during a period of high inflation, if we've got, 1.2 billion in the SIF fund and inflation's 10%, then next year, that fund is going to be worth $120 million less in terms of buying power. So it actually is costing us money if we don't have it invested smartly. So, we have introduced to the majority leaders and the new approach chairs, the concept of, hey, could we streamline and get more transparency around this? And then we could perhaps, see things like the SIF fund just be what they are, which is right now it's a second checking account that operates really like, in many ways, like the general fund does. And so I guess I would concur with your thesis that there's ways where we could clean up the accounting to make it more transparent and importantly, improve our returns on our cash management.
Governor, Ben here. Congratulations on the budget address delivery and to your team for compiling that today. You said before I could that it is a mammoth effort, and delivering that speech and communicating that is not a simplistic speech to deliver. I had the opportunity to listen to some of that today. I want to ask you about a couple of particular aspects, some bold maneuvers that but bold ideas that you have proposed in there. I wanted to ask, you emphasized the idea that we have enough money in the funds to not move the profits as they usually do from the state-owned mill and state-owned bank. We are a unique state in that we are the only one in the union that has those state-owned entities. And you said that by keeping the profits that typically would go into the general fund, they could be earning up to 15% interest. I'd like you to talk about that. And more specifically, what stood out to me was how in the world do they earn 15% interest at these state-owned entities?
Well, the 15% I referred to was not on interest, but 15% return on invested capital.
Oh, I apologize.
So no, not at all. But there's a lot of numbers flying around today for sure. Like you said, and I appreciate your comments because it is challenging to have so many numbers in a speech in that amount of time. But we have had, as you said correctly, Ben, almost out of tradition or habit, then swept about half the profits from the mill and from the bank. Collectively that can be $150 million. Most of that is the, $140 million from the bank, and then we dump it in the general fund. Well, then we end up with a general fund ending balance, and it's going to be, hundreds of millions of dollars, or in this case, even higher this year. And so if we've taken money away from the bank, where they could be using that for bank operations, which includes all the things that they are legislatively directed to do, which they've got a set of activities there that it would be, small farmer loans and their, ag PACE loans and other infrastructure loan funds. I mean, there's things that they're directed to do, and then there's their core business where they act as a bank that works. A correspondent bank in conjunction with our very strong local banking network. So a local bank would say, hey, I want to loan money to this company, to a manufacturer, to this ag processor, and the loan gets above their loan limits. They can come to the Bank of North Dakota, and the Bank of North Dakota would syndicate. They might take half of that loan, but in that business, the Bank of North Dakota is not competing with local banks. They're providing a very valuable backstop for them that allows them to diversify their risk and do more business. And then that's one of the reasons why we have so many strong locally owned and family owned banks and credit unions in our state, is because of the state bank. I mean, it's really, other states haven't seen that. They've seen national and consolidation, the disappearance of local units. So the bank plays an important role. If we leave those profits in the bank can do more of that kind of activity, supporting communities and supporting agriculture and energy. And when they do that, and we look at the bank as we do the Industrial Commission, which is the Ag Commissioner, the Attorney General, and myself as the board of directors, as we look at that and say, what are the returns you're getting on the capital you're giving? They're getting these, mid-teens returns on invested capital, as is the mill doing its work. So again, makes no sense to take the profits out of those institutions, put them in the general fund, and then earn almost no interest at sort of checking account returns versus leaving them in those institutions and letting those institutions conduct their missions. And right now, I'm sure there have been times in history where to make ends meet, we needed to bring those profits back in to cover general fund. That is not the case now, because we're not only covering all the general fund expenditures, we're going to have very large surpluses at the end of 2025 as part of this executive budget as well.
Governor, I wanted to talk to you about the income taxes. I mean, we've been talking about sort of the spending side of it, but you have a big proposal for income taxes on the table. You're estimating $250 million a year. That'd be $500 million tax cut per 2-year cycle. One thing that worries me a little bit, the Democrats, I'm reading now, this is a press release put out by the Democratic NPL party. This is House Minority Leader Josh Boucher. He said it takes too much money off the table that we could use to spend on other things like education and childcare and workforce development. And then he says it disproportionately benefits the wealthiest North Dakotans. I don't agree with that criticism. But one thing that worries me, just recently we had a report out from the oil industry. They commissioned a report about oil tax revenues, and their report found that something like 51% of all of the tax dollars collected by the state of North Dakota are coming from the oil production and extraction taxes. And so one thing that leaves me a little bit concerned, as much as I like the idea of cutting income taxes, can you answer, does it make us too dependent on oil taxes? I mean, when we're already taking in, again, 51%, I worry that we're putting too many eggs in one basket. How do you address that concern?
Well, I have to go back and take back a look at sort of how oil taxes are used. And this goes back to your earlier question about, funds. But in the general fund of approximately $6 billion, only about $1 billion of that is oil tax revenue. 30% of oil tax revenue right into the legacy fund. Other big chunks of it, some of that goes to tribes, some of that goes to local cities and counties by formula. So the state itself has not and is not highly dependent on oil taxes. It is true that a large number of the taxes that are collected do come from oil sources, but they get redirected to lots of different places, whether it's, displacing other forms of revenue for those oil-impacted cities and counties or others. But in our 4 major tax types, which is corporate income tax, personal income tax, sales tax, and motor excise tax, those are, very broad based. One of those right now, and I think we're in the context of our, as a state, we're in a contest, in a competition with every other state for workforce. And one of the ways that states are attracting workforce is having low income tax environment. The plan that we have out, which has basically got 2 tax bracket, one tax bracket is 0 for the bottom 60% of payers. The highest, 40% of payers would be paying a flat tax of 1.5%. That'd be the lowest flat tax in the nation. That is, that would be helpful in helping us recruit workforce. But interestingly, of the 8 states that have no income tax, and there are more states that are moving in that, in that direction, is Wyoming, Alaska, and Texas are all 0 income tax states. Those are all states that we compete with for labor. I mean, we've got people that are here working in North Dakota every week that are their families stay in Texas and they come up here and work, and then they're back, and then they probably say, as soon as I get a job in the Permian, I'll just stay here and I don't have to commute to North Dakota. Part of the reason they want to be there as a worker is because Texas has got no income tax and we do. So we are, again, trying to make our state more competitive. And when we're more competitive and we got more workers, our economy is going to grow. And when our economy grows, then we're going to have, not just today, I mean, on Minority Leader Boucher's comment, we do have the money, and in our budget, we do have proposals on education at record levels, child care at record levels, all the things that he's suggesting, human services, those are already in there. We could actually do both. We're in a position where we can invest wisely in the things that matter, and we can put money back in the pockets of North Dakotans. And when we look at we've got some of the lowest unemployment in the nation. right now. And if we look at all the hard to fill jobs that we're short of, and just, take three obvious categories that everybody runs into, teachers, healthcare workers, nurses in particular, and like CDL drivers, which affect everything from the people that are, collecting your garbage to, driving trucks for the supply chain to, helping harvest our crops. All of those would fall into that. Those job types would fall into the lowest 60%. So we would be in a position where the jobs that we're having the hardest time filling would be paying no income tax.
Governor, it's a bold income tax proposal. I don't know if we've seen one like that in recent years, but to your point, you just cited 8 states that do not have state income taxes. And in your budget address, you mentioned this being a beginning stage or an eventual off-ramp into having a framework where we have no personal income tax here. 2 of the largest or fastest growing states in the country, Florida and Texas, do not have income taxes, and their governors, I would say, and other people there would claim part of their population increase is due to those lack of income tax. I think that's a debate that could be had, but why not go all the way? Why not propose the whole loaf and simply say, we have enough money, I'm going to be the governor that gets rid of the income tax? Because I, as a former, I probably have legislator brain, unfortunately, it's an unfortunate disease I'm still infected with, could foresee something happening in an appropriations committee or somewhere else where it is said that they like it, but they don't, and then it's amended and it's amended again, and you're not voting on those committees, and eventually when it becomes untenable to enough people, they say, well, it's better just to leave things as they are, and you get nothing. So why not go all the way in the proposal?
Well, I think it goes back to Rob's point, which is, and even the way we're structuring this thing, we're structuring it as a zero tax bracket, a two tax bracket thing, as opposed to try to, make income tax collections illegal in code. I wouldn't want to pin in future legislators or future executive branch tax commissioners or governors, 20, 30 years down the road, because you don't actually know, how all those legs on the stools may play out. But I do know that for right now, we're on a path where if we're taking only about 3.5% a year, as the proposal, 7% of market value over a 2-year period out of the legacy fund, we're getting returns higher than that. So we're returning some of those returns into the legacy fund to make it grow. In a year like this, we had $1.8 billion of principal payments that are going to, or this 2-year period, into the legacy fund. At some point, if we don't have an oil tax revenue like we have right now, the legacy fund has got to replace that. And so that's where, if I didn't have that, Rob, I wouldn't feel like that I might be more cautious about this kind of reduction in income tax, because you'd like to have diversified sources of revenue in any business. But I do think that we are building another revenue source. This year, it's going to be close to $500 million of revenue coming off of the earnings of the legacy fund into the general fund. So we're halfway there already in replacing the $1 billion of general fund activity. But this is really, I would think that the legislature, as in Ben's words, they may take a look at this 1.5% flat tax. They might actually say, hey, we'll put in some triggers into this thing, and when the legacy fund payments get to be a certain size, then we can go down to 1, we can go down to 0.5, we can go down to 0, and we can be on a path to do that in terms of how we want to phase it out over time, and we can do that as we build legacy fund principle.
Governor, I want to switch gears and talk about workforce. I was really happy. I remember during the oil boom in the past, whenever hard economic times would hit us, and people would wonder, well, why didn't North Dakota's unemployment rate jump up? And the fact was, we just don't have a lot of elasticity in our workforce here. A lot of times when they lose their jobs, they leave, which is unfortunate. But having access to a workforce has been which I think you understand, you mentioned it in your speech, has been one of the most pernicious problems North Dakota has had, I would argue, almost since statehood. And I don't know that we've ever really solved the problem for it. But I know one issue is childcare. It is horrendously expensive for families to pay for it. I know I've been paying for it for 20 years now. I spread my kids out a lot, so I've been paying for childcare for a long time. And I know there was a coalition that did some listening sessions, and one thing they're talking about is they want the state to use legacy fund dollars or some other source of revenue to supplement childcare wages. In your budget address, you're talking about $76 million in recommendations to improve the affordability, availability, and quality of childcare. And I'm wondering if you could detail that. How is that going to work?
Well, first of all, you're correct, Rob. There was a broad coalition. We had Lieutenant Governor Sanford, myself, folks from industry, folks from the child care side of things, employers, parents, people from education, healthcare. I mean, it's just a very broad set of people, because if you ask any employer right now what's their number one problem, they say workforce, and you say what's the number one way to fix that, the answer is child care. Because in North Dakota, if you added up all the, we have almost, I'm going to say almost no people, but a couple of weeks ago it was 650 people that were on unemployment. Now it's I think 1,800 or something. Seasonally it's still lower than it ever has been in the last 15 years. And if all of those, if we have 35,000 jobs open and you got 1,800 people on unemployment, getting them off of unemployment doesn't fix it. You take every high school graduate and every college graduate and get them a job, and 100% of them stay in North Dakota, we're still short. We've looked at the non-traditional sources of employment, like people coming out of our correction system, which many states are being very successful at making sure that people coming out have a certificate or a trade and have employment, which then keeps them from ending back up in the criminal justice system. So that you have if you add all that up, it gets to 22,000. We're still 13,000 jobs short. And the fastest way to close that gap, we have 55,000 kids in North Dakota under age of 5. I mean, think of that. I mean, that's incredible. And what a blessing that we're now, a growing and younger state again for the first time in 8 decades. We have that going on. But I say, if you put all those kids in one spot, it'd be like the city of Grand Forks, 55,000 kids age 5 and under. And then you can decide whether you want to drive towards that city or drive away from a city of 55,000 5 and under. I know some grandparents that might go for a couple hours and then leave again. But it's a really good problem to have. But of those 55,000 kids, they come from 40,000 working households. And in 70% of those households, both parents want to work. So the fastest way for us to get people back into the workforce is to solve their child care. And so the 3 legs on the stool is, is it available? Because in some parts of our state, it's not available. Other places where and when I say not available, there may be a child care provider, but, we hear things like the wait list can be 6 months or a year, or, people are deciding when to have their next child based on if they can get a child care slot. I mean, that would have been unheard of, 10 or 20 or 30 years ago. So availability is one. Affordability is the next thing, because if you're in a lower job at a lower end of the wage scale and you want to do that job, but childcare is expensive, at some point the parents can't afford to work. I mean, they can't afford to. If they do their job, it might be more economic for them to stay home, particularly when they have a second child, and definitely when they have a third child. Because if someone's paying $10,000 or $11,000 or $12,000 a year for childcare after tax, and you have 3 kids, I mean, who's got $36,000 for 3 kids to spend on childcare? I mean, we had places where households are spending 15 to 40% of their household income on childcare. So affordability is the second one, and the third one is quality, because we all care about our children more than anything else, and so you want to make sure that you've got high quality care. So there's some elements underneath that. One is expanding the current child care assistance program. Another is increasing the state rate for families who receive child care assistance. Others is offering incentives to providers who meet the quality care. There's other parts in there in terms of workforce, providing certification programs for people to be able to work in a child care environment. And if they get the certification, people know there's quality, but then they can get paid a higher wage rate because they've achieved those levels. So all of those things play into that. And we had about a dozen legislators stand up with us when we announced it. There's a lot of depth in it. We hope the legislature gives it deep consideration because it could be the number one thing to helping us solve the workforce issue.
It's clearly a linchpin, and you ask any chamber of commerce, and like you said, any employer around the state, it has been the thing they're hearing the most about. It affects the most broad swath of people. Going back, Governor, to schools really quickly, and I straight up apologize if I'm taking this out of context, but I heard the proper context. I heard you say during your speech today that 54% of school districts weren't currently on or weren't completely on our funding formula, and you wanted to align that better, or at least have legislators take up the idea. Can you explain that a little further? Because I'll be honest, I didn't quite understand it. And could you also maybe give us a little bit of a history of how in the world did that happen? How did 46% of schools wind up not being on the formula as designated by the legislature for public funding?
Well, the most current history of this begins, I believe, in 2013 when a formula was created to try to gain alignment. And everybody said, well, if we get on the formula, that's going to be too tough because some schools are going to get paid less and some are going to get paid more, and probably aligned with which schools were growing and which schools were shrinking in terms of population. So they said to ease that pressure, we're going to phase it in over a period of time. And then there's been legislation that says, well, we're going to, instead of, grandfathering people in for, 3 or 5 or 7 years, we're just going to keep extending it. So this 2013 legislation, and here we are. And I think the current plan has everybody getting on the formula by 2027. And we just feel like we've got the dollars. Let's get it done now.
And I was going to say, it seems to me that students would be left in the lurch. I remember that switchback because it was, at the time, it was the 2 W's. You referenced the 3 W's. It was Williston, West Fargo, and I believe you said Wofford City. And at the time, Williston and West Fargo were the fastest growing schools, and they felt like some of the more rural districts that weren't growing were being left behind. But yeah, I understand the desire for local control, but I feel like it's a real problem, and you're really giving some students some unfair treatment in the funding formula when you're allowing folks to grandfather into the point where 46% of all public schools are off of the formula.
Well, agree. And in some cases, again, in sort of an ironic twist, if you're a West Fargo and it's on the formula, but also the current formula we pay on last year's census numbers. Mm-hmm. So if you're West Fargo and you grew 600 students, which they've done almost every year for the last 6 years, you're growing more than a Tioga school district every year. But you have to figure out how do I this year deliver education to all the students we had last year plus 600 more, and then make that work on last year's payment levels. And if you're a shrinking school, it's not just in some cases that you went down, but you got paid for students that aren't there. And some of those schools are getting paid for their 2013 level. So if our average pay per student on the formula is about $11,000 now with the increases we proposed, we've got the large, fast-growing schools are getting less than that per pupil, and some of the small rural schools that are grandfathered in some cases, are getting $20,000 or $25,000 per student. But they might, ironically, have less educational opportunities than some other place. So there's work that needs to be done here on the formula for sure, and we've got the ability to be able to do that. And on the transition, there's 2 other complicated terms. The transition maximums, inversely, was for people that were low. How do we get them up to the $11,000 per pupil payment? We have across our state about 4,400 students that are still trapped in schools that are getting less than the what is the per pupil payment. Most of those are in our tribal areas, and so in our budget we've got the ability, we've got in the budget to move all of those folks up from where they are to what they should be getting paid appropriately, and like everybody else in the state. The transition minimums, that's where we have this case of the $20,000 per student. We did not take that out at this time because we think there's other ways to address the cost, because whether it's administrative consolidation, sharing superintendents, there's other things that we can do there to try to not consolidating schools, but just getting more efficient on components of how we deliver that education in the rural areas, that we can get some savings back on that front. And we look forward to working with all the educational groups on how to make that happen. And while we're talking about funding, we always got to remember that this should be about the students, not about, it shouldn't be about anything other than how do we give them the very best education. And then how do we at the same time work on getting better outcomes for those students, and whether that's reading scores, math scores, whatever it happens to be. We just can't lose sight of that when the adults are all in the room talking about money. We got to really focus on the outcomes.
Well, Governor, thank you so much for your time today. We asked for a half hour. You gave us a half hour, so I really appreciate it. And obviously this debate's going to continue for the months ahead. So it's always a much different look when spring comes around on this stuff than it does when we're talking about it in December. Anyway, thank you very much for your time.
Well, thank you, Rob, and Ben, welcome aboard. And Rob, we'll look forward to talking to you again throughout the session.
Keeping in touch with your community through local news and information is the gift that keeps giving all year long. Subscribe now to get 50% off an annual subscription for you or anyone on your list. Visit inforum.com/subscribe to get started.
Well, just my voice survived the interview with the governor. We'll see if it survives the second half here of Ben and I talking.
Just barely.
I was struggling a little bit in a couple of those where I just wanted to cough. And that's the worst thing in the world, is just a cough into the microphone into everybody's ear. Nobody wants that. Interesting address. One thing that I wanted to get is the dynamic. We've got two new appropriations chairs. We had two that had been there.
Change.
We had two that had been there for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
Probably two of the most powerful political figures in the state that very few people had heard of. Ray Holmberg, obviously one of the longest serving state lawmakers in state history, in national history, didn't run for re-election. And then Jeff Delzer was defeated in the primary. He was the House Appropriations Chair. So two new appropriations chairs. Burgum clashed with Delzer a lot. And in fact, sort of famously in a previous session, when Delzer was the House Appropriations Chair, Delzer effectively, the rumor, and I don't know how much truth is this, the rumor that I was told is that when the governor delivered his executive budget, Delzer basically threw it in the trash. And, that was sort of the attitude. I wonder if it's going to be, I have a feeling the two new appropriations chairs, I think they're both very pragmatic people. I feel like it's going to be a better relationship with Governor Burgum, and that's going to be helpful, hopefully, to this whole process.
I feel that at times, and this isn't an insult to any governors, Burgum or Dalrymple, that Jeff Delzer might have been a more powerful political figure and probably had more control over the state budget that we all live under in the state of North Dakota than those governors. We have, and again, this is not an insult to Doug Burgum or anyone else who is the governor. We have a weak governor as it is set up with the legislature, intentionally so. And if you look at the history of some states that have strong governorships, it's probably not something that the people in the state of North Dakota wanted, nor do I particularly think Burgum or anyone else has advocated for. But what that means is something that happened to us as legislators, actually something that Jeff Delzer once said to me was, once you sponsor a bill, or once you, in the case of Governor Burgum, put forward an executive budget as a proposal, it's now no longer yours. Now it's the committee's, and the committee can amend as it sees fit if it gets the majority, hopefully in good faith, and then bring it to the floor of either the Senate or the House chamber to vote on. And then it can get changed again in conference committee, and you can watch as that football goes down the field and turns into to mix my sports metaphors, turns into a basketball or a baseball, and by the time you're in the end zone, you're not playing the same sport anymore, and you're a little frustrated. And as you can tell, I'm not a big sports fan because I'm not good at the metaphors.
Well, I think that aspect's going to be very interesting. One thing we didn't get into with the governor either is, he's got his income tax proposal on the table, but there's a rival, and I think it's a rival. I think that's how it's going to be perceived by the legislature, a property tax proposal to use legacy fund dollars to try to buy down property taxes and eliminate. I think they're looking to eliminate the education portion of property taxes entirely. And I'll be honest, I am not as enthusiastic about the property tax proposal, if only because we have tried these buy downs so many more times. There's so many other ways that property tax, because you got to remember, the school district's just one taxing entity that makes up that property tax bill. If you eliminate the school, then the city and the county and all these others are going to come in and backfill. I don't think we've had any luck to that approach. I don't want to keep trying it. I understand everybody's crying out for property tax relief all the time. I don't know that the legislature has a good mechanism to deliver it.
I don't know necessarily that it does, and I did see the governor
short of I should say, reaching down and just putting caps and limits on counties or park districts or whatever that are, frankly, obviate the local control that we also all want.
Yeah, it directly violates the philosophy that many in the legislature say that they're for, but I don't always see their actions bearing that out. I will say the governor, I was going to use the word snapback, but, it kind of was terse in his description that he's like, well, I've heard a lot of you during his budget address to the legislature today say that you're hearing a lot more people talk about property taxes on doors versus income taxes. And I gotta say, I was one of those people that was out knocking doors this election this year. And yeah, not a single person has talked about income taxes. I am a lifelong North Dakotan and I am a property owner. My property taxes have gone up in a way that really makes me grimace when I look between the year 2020, 2021, 2022. My house is the same. In fact, the sink broke and I had to replace it. And yet my valuation.
You didn't add a helipad or a swimming pool or anything.
Nope, no pool, no nothing. And so, they are responding to their constituents, which is what they are supposed to be doing as legislators. I hear what you're saying. The previous mechanisms have been kind of robbing Peter to pay Paul. But couldn't we come up with something new? I didn't really feel, how did you feel? I didn't really feel the governor had a very direct answer for me when I asked, why not just ask for the whole loaf? Why not just go ahead, be bold, and ask to eliminate income tax? He did come back a little bit and say he wanted to have multiple sources of revenue as a sort of a business philosophy. I don't disagree, but I could see a lot of very conservative or particular types of legislators disagreeing with him pretty heartily there.
Well, I think part of the reason he didn't was probably my criticism, which he did respond to, which I am worried that we put too many eggs in one basket. I mean, when oil prices are high, things are good, but we saw a few cycles ago what happens or more than a few cycles ago now, I guess, we saw what happens when the bottom falls out of the oil market. Yes, a lot of those revenues, like the direct oil taxes, the production and extraction taxes, they flow mostly into the legacy fund. Their impact on the general fund is limited. But the oil industry impacts tax collections more than just those direct taxes, right? All those oil workers are paying income taxes. They're paying sales taxes. And when those oil jobs go away, they take their income and they take their transactions and they go to other places. They don't stick around here. So, if the bottom, it's not just direct oil taxes that get hit. It's income taxes that get hit. I do worry about it, and I suspect going whole hog. I think it was a political decision. Obviously he wants to get there and eliminate the income tax, and so do I. But I think he's thinking. I think if you want that, you have to
ask for it, because we meet every other year. It's 4 months every other year. You have 20 months in between. Institutional memories are long. Now you've got to really play it out. You got term limits of limiting institutional memory. I think you might get it done this time and then have it completely adjusted or changed next time. If you want that to be your legacy, and I think it's interesting because he's in his second term, 4-year term as governor. He's in his last session in his second term, so of his 8 years. So depending on whether he chooses to run for a third term or not, he will not be around to propose the income tax elimination that he says he wants. Now, could you make an argument that a successor could push for that? Sure, but he's not going to be able to guarantee that. So I thought it was an interesting move.
I think the successor to Doug Burgum's this current term is going to be Doug Burgum.
I agree.
Obviously, if we ask him that question, he's not going to tell us. He's running for a third term. I would bet. I'm not a gambling man, but if I was, I would bet a substantial amount of money on that.
Oh, I'd put $20 down on that, but I think he's not going to like the result he gets. I might be wrong, but I think he might not like the result he gets.
I think you're ignoring, because I remember circa, God, was it 2006? Back in my day when I was just a nobody blogger, I collected signatures for an income tax proposal, ballot measure, that would have cut personal income taxes by 50%, and it failed. But then the legislature, in subsequent sessions, one after the other, kept cutting the rates of the income tax down to where it got under 50%. So I don't know. I mean, I think I understand the point you're making. I do think the incrementalism can work. It can get there. And, you know, I don't know. I don't know if this was the right decision, you know, where there, and essentially for people who don't know what the plan is, right now, I think North Dakota has 4, I don't have my notes in front of me. I think we have 4 tax brackets. And then essentially what Burgum's proposal does is he cuts it down to 2. And basically it's a 0 bracket where, you know, if you're making under, I think, what is it, $95,000 a year as a
52
as a person, and then
it's as a single person,
and then it's like 100 and some,
married,
100 and some is married, something like that.
A double-ish equivalent.
But yeah, so essentially, if you're under that, you pay nothing. If you're above it, you pay 1.5.
1.5, and that's a severe. That is a big reduction for everybody, except for North Dakota's 4 income tax brackets. If you're making under $40,000 a year, you're just not paying the state a lot of income taxes.
No,
I feel like it's like less than $100.
I do laugh every time when I hear, like, minority leader Josh Boucher, who I think is a great guy, but I always hear it's like, well, we're only giving income tax we're giving it mostly to the people at the top of the tax bracket. Well, when you have a progressive income tax and you cut the taxes across the board, of course the people who make more money are going to benefit from more. There's no other way to cut that tax.
Well, and I think his point is, and I haven't talked to him about this, so I'm not speaking for him, but I would agree, you know, I thought the Democrats should have, and I should have, when I was in the legislature, proposed the first half of Doug Burgum's tax cut. Everyone who's making $50K or under, you don't pay anything to the state. We want to keep you around, and we know that those dollars you earn go right back into the economy, because if you're making $50K a year, you're likely, you know, hopefully you're saving some for a rainy day, but you're very likely spending on rent, food, services, whichever, and it goes right back into it. If you're in the in order to be in North Dakota's highest income bracket currently, you got to make so much bank that you forgot how many taxes you pay, because you can afford such a fancy accountant that, I'm sorry, you're really not paying.
You have to be so affluent, all your bills are set to auto pay.
You forgot it was tax time because you're hanging out in one of your 7 homes in Hawaii or something. Like, I mean, you're doing okay.
I think we might be overstating it a little bit, but I mean, yeah,
a bit, but like for the most part, you are hiring higher end accounting firms to make sure you're not paying anything, and you don't.
Yeah,
so when you look at the amount of money the state will not be taking in for the 1.5 versus the 0 for the people under the 52,000, it's a lot more for that 1.5 that the state is skipping out on. And I do understand Representative Boucher's point. If I know it correctly, I am making assumptions. And Governor Burgum even alluded to it, that you don't want to eliminate all of your options, because come a rainy day, you can go and take a look back at Governor Sam Brownback's tax cuts and where they led to in the state of Kansas. I mean, they really sunk the state's budget for a little bit, to the point where they really had to crawl their way out. It was a bit of a schism within the Republican
Party. I mean, that's probably the argument for the governor doing it so incrementally.
Yeah. I mean, Kansas has a female Democrat governor right now, and part of that was, post blowback of the party splitting into the Republican Party splitting into in Kansas.
Right. Kansas is a weird place politically. North Dakota is a weird place politically a lot of times.
Yes, it is.
We have, I very much, of the two, of the property tax plan versus the income tax plan, I hope we pass the income tax plan. Although I do see a path forward, because one interesting thing, and the governor alluded to this, is we have all this money sitting in these funds. And the list of funds is as long as your arm. If you go to the Treasury website, the state treasurer's website, Josh Beadle, and actually his predecessor is the one who created this. What's that?
You said Josh Beadle.
Thomas Beadle. Tom.
We know what you meant.
He likes Thomas. I don't know why I said Josh. I'm on drugs right now. Is cold medicine, but yeah.
You're rocking that Robitussin.
I'm not hitting on all cylinders. I mean, it's a long laundry list. There are billions of dollars caught up there. There's got to be a way for us to leverage some of that into revenues that could be used for. Because that's the thing. You think of the legacy fund, and people say, "Oh, spending legacy fund dollars." You got to remember, a lot of times they're spending the interest. They're spending the revenue that the legacy fund kicks off. Yeah. It has become a revenue source in and of itself that's distinct from oil taxes or where it gets its revenue from.
And it's in the billions with a B at this point. And I don't know how salient, the governor made the point. How salient is that? How transparent is that for people, let alone legislators? Do they know when they see the top headline? You made the point. Well, it's the biggest budget we've ever had. Well, guess what? Inflation's also 8-9%. We have how much of that was put in by federal funds. Those details need to be considered when we're talking about it. I had a couple other bullet points I wanted to just grab from his speech, and I'll make them fast. He referenced cost of living increases of 8 to 9% given to public employees simply to retain them in the 80s when North Dakota was having some of its more dire economic times because we were a very egg-based economy and we were having a lot of drought at the time. Yeah. I couldn't quite get a read on what kind of COLA increases he was looking for state employees to have here. He wanted to move away from a dedicated benefit to a dedicated contribution, though. And to me, it seemed like he had a generous package this time while moving public employees into paying more into their benefits. And I know the consternation that the public employee, associations of the world are going to have, or they're going to say.
Yeah, they don't like it. Their press release came out that North Dakota United doesn't like it at all. They want to keep that defined benefit. I mean, frankly, if I was on the defined benefit, my wife's a teacher now. So for the first time, as we're debating this, I have some skin in the game, but the
defined benefits there, though, because public employee wages don't compete with private sector, exponential private sector wages, and it's supposed to keep them more secure, is the thought. Is it universally true in every single solitary situation? No, but I don't understand how the defined benefit system is broken, why is he trying to fix it?
I disagree that the defined benefit system, I have a problem with the way that they work. I mean, they obligate the state to... I mean, basically, a defined benefit pension is once you're vested, once you qualify for it, you're guaranteed. It's a defined benefit. You are guaranteed to get a certain amount out of it. But the thing is that the revenue from the pension fund, which is invested, isn't nearly set in stone. We're not guaranteed to get any sort of a rate. And in a lot of ways, you look at these, the audits and reviews that are done of them. A lot of times they're underfunded. And it's a problem, and yeah, we could just dump more money in, but it's kind of the same problem we have with like Social Security at the national level. And there's a debate, and I know one side of the ideological spectrum really likes defined benefit pensions, whether it's Social Security or something for public workers, and the people on my side of it don't like it so much. We prefer like the 401k IRA. Governor Burgum wants to move away from that defined pension. Now, people have been trying to do that for a long time. And they haven't gotten a lot of traction with it. The best they've done is they've set up a voluntary alternate where people can choose to opt in, and not many people do because the defined benefit plan, from the perspective of the worker, is the much more lucrative compensation. From the perspective of the taxpayer, it's probably not such a great deal. But from the perspective of the worker, the one thing, trying to make that pension move while we're having a recruitment crisis in education is a tough one, because we're talking all about we're having trouble attracting workers. We're having trouble attracting workers specifically to work in state government, specifically to work in our schools. One of the most attractive things about working for the government is that pension. Whether I think it's good, it makes good fiduciary sense for the state to offer it or not, it is hugely attractive to the workers.
And a public sector that doesn't have a ton of toolkits to try and attract workers in a place where lucrative private sector jobs are having a rough time getting good employees to be retained there. They have to have something in their toolkits.
I think it's reform. I think it's reform that has to happen eventually. I don't think defined benefit pension plans are sustainable over the long term. That being said, I don't know that the political winds are blowing the right way to get this done right now, because if we want to attract workers while simultaneously doing away with that benefit, that's tough. That's
a terrible idea then. And when you have empty seats and you have to retrain people, you have to think about being penny wise and pound foolish in the long term. Is that going to truly be the best cost saver? The last point I want to make about the budget was he referenced the implication of state radio. State radio is not a thing that a lot of people think about or hear about or talk about, unless you're in that industry. Or maybe I'm wrong, but I don't hear a lot of people talk about it. It is where emergency services are. He called them the first responders, and he's right. First link, 211, where people call when they're having a medical emergency, a mental health crisis. Sometimes those are tied into suicide hotlines, things like that. That the governor referenced that there's only been 1 month since 2018 that they have been fully funded. And if I'd had a chance, more time with him, I would like to have heard what he's heard. And I'd like to know, and I think Health and Human Services should really look into who and what is falling in between the cracks with that not being funded. Because really, truly, it's not a big workforce. It's not a large amount of FTEs, full-time employees that you need to ask for. That needs to be shorn up, and that needs to be something that legislators need to have their hair on fire about. Kudos to the governor for mentioning it. I think you should beat the drums on it. I think that's one that should be grabbing attention.
It plays into a lot of other, when we talk about addiction problems, we talk about mental health crises problems. I mean, we talk about suicide rates, which historically for our part of the country are higher than a lot of other places. And we could talk about why that is. It might be, the fact that we're a commodity-driven economy. Some of those swings in the ag markets or the energy markets are tough for people. And sometimes they deal with it by harming themselves, which, by the way, if you're listening to this, please get help. It's never so bad that you can't find a way out. But anyway, it's tough. Suicide is a big problem in our part of the world.
And you got to know, and you do know how hard it is to be staffing them. The increase that a outfit like FirstLink that operates here in Fargo, that services a statewide service, they are grabbing college kids, people who are fresh out. They're getting their social work degree. This is what they mean to be doing. But you are on the phone listening to people trying to help and guide them through their mental health crises, trying to.
It's a high burnout. It's high burnout.
Suicide hotline calls, and they're trying to attract workers at $45,000 a year. It doesn't work, and it's I understand the responsibility of being good stewards of state taxpayer dollars, because it is someone's money at the end of the day. There are things that I think simply are good uses of funds, and the workforce and what is being asked for to fully fund this and to get this truly up and running where it needs to be. I don't think I'm not calling the public stupid. I just don't think that people not working in the industry understand the urgency and the increase that is there and the dollar amount that would take to shore that up. And it's not just money that's going to fix it. It's going to be people and good, efficient systems running it. But it's simply not that large in the grand scheme of things. It needs to be done.
Well, maybe we could spend because I think you're right. I think a lot of people think about those services. It's kind of like the power. Like nobody thinks about the power company until you flip the light, until the furnace doesn't come on, right? Mm-hmm. Now it's a problem. Nobody thinks about that. Nobody thinks about the garbage men or the landfill until all of a sudden your garbage isn't being taken away, right? Now it's a problem.
Yep.
So it is one of those issues, and it's one of those issues we should be debating about. And, what frustrates me is a lot of times what gets the attention is stuff like the rally that was held at the state capitol this week, where you had a former Republican lawmaker, Sebastian Ertelt, who was part of the Bastiat caucus of, I'm not supposed to talk about them. That doesn't actually exist, according to
he was the one they called Seabass, right? Or is
right. That's right.
Yeah. What a weird name.
And when he called himself that too, and I don't know where that came from. I have no idea where that nickname.
He's a strange human being, from what I understand.
He's a little odd. But they had a big rally, and they were up there. He says they had about 100 people. I looked at some of the pictures.
Sure.
I don't know if they hit that, but I mean, if you could pull 100 people out to stand in front of the Capitol in this weather, good on you, I guess. But I mean, they were focused on, Bill Gates and the World Economic Forum is trying to enslave people and all this stuff. And, they're going to their lawmaker. They're talking about this stuff. And meanwhile, our first responders, as the governor referred to them, are underfunded. Meanwhile, we have school districts that aren't participating in the funding formula that the legislature set up nearly a decade ago now. We have chronic workforce shortages. And part of that formula is the fact that it's so flippin' expensive to find someone to take care of your kids so that you can go work, or so that both parents in a home can go work and earn money and find prosperity. So it frustrates me how hung up. I also know, coming up in this session, and I don't mean to belittle this issue, because this topic is obviously a lot of people care very deeply about it. I care very deeply about it. But abortion, I feel like we're probably going to end up with dozens of abortion bills. And I have a feeling that some of them are going to be good debates to have. I have a feeling a lot of them are going to be a waste of everybody's time. And listen, I get it. It's tough. What's important is not up to Rob Port to decide which bills are important. These people are duly elected. They have access to the process the same as everybody else. But it frustrates me when there's so many good issues that smart conservatives and smart liberals could come to the table and talk about. And a lot of times we get derailed by these other things that I don't know why they get more attention. They capture people's imagination more.
Well, and when you suck the oxygen out of the room with some of these higher end, broad, but really truly pointless, I mean, I'm going to call them conspiracy theories. I'll say it because I looked at that flyer and it was trying to get the U.S. to not be so involved with the UN, global standards about something. Didn't really say about what, actually. Didn't like mention specifically vaccines. Didn't go quite so far as to get into microchip conspiracy theories, but it specifically mentioned Bill Gates, and at the end of the day, none of those things are in the purview of what a North Dakota legislator can affect, and that is a problem, and you are robbing that legislator and therefore their constituents, which does include them, of time. There's a lack of appreciation of the urgency of this. You have 80 days every other year to pass a 2-year budget. That budget is what some people are not going to live and die by necessarily, but it's what you're going to be funded at. It's what the rules and regulations that we are all as a state going to live under. And when you suck up oxygen on things, it's what I like to call the Godzilla defense appropriation bill, where somebody comes in to the U.S. Senate or DOD and says, all right, Godzilla's a big lizard. He's over 600 feet tall. How much money are you going to spend to stop him? What kind of missiles you got? And you coming back and you're like, well, Godzilla's not real. What are you talking about? It's like, excuse me. I told you he was 600 feet tall and he can crush buildings. Enough of your silliness and your doubts. Tell me how much money you're going to spend on him. And even having a debate, and I picked a topic as stupid as that on purpose, even having this debate took away from the actual debate we were supposed to be having that day at DOD, which was F-14, F-13, which one class shouldn't we have? And It's not sexy. It doesn't generate headlines. It doesn't generate clicks. And if you're a freshman legislator coming in here, and we have a lot of freshmen, we're going to have a lot more because now we have term limits. You just got elected. You're a citizen legislator. Not everybody's a millionaire. Most aren't. You're trying to adjust from your full-time job, your family back home, if you don't live in the Bismarck or Mandan area, to go live in a new place.
You don't have
for
staff.
4 months out of the year.
You don't have
You don't have a staff. You're trying to figure out how to keep your job and your family intact while going out and doing the business of the people. After you just got done on a long campaign, you're in an organizational session. You're trying to figure out which committees you're on. And then if you're a House member, 5 days into your first session, that's the expiration date on when you can propose bills. Now you can't propose bills for another 2 years. And you've got people like that outside the Capitol grabbing your attention. If you're trying to be generous with your time or fair with your time, you're trying to give everybody a fair shake, and everyone does get to have a fair shake, including people that I don't agree with, including people that I would say are concerned about things that are not things that need to be concerned about at all. But there needs to be a responsibility on the protesters' part to understand you are taking up urgent time that we need to be debating things that might be considered boring to you, but they are sure as heck not for the people who are directly receiving those services, whether it's a suicide hotline or simply a pension that someone's been working for their whole lives. That directly impacts their whole life. North Dakota is not a member of the UN. Yes, the United States of America is. Yes, there's a broader context.
That's a debate for Congress, and maybe that's a good debate to have. But listen, and here's the thing that really bothers me, and we'll wrap things up here, but North Dakota has such an open process. Every bill, right? We don't have a lot of the shenanigans maybe you see in other legislatures where bills get killed in committee. Every bill gets a committee hearing. Every bill gets a floor vote. It's a very, very open process. Lawmakers are fantastically responsive. I mean, maybe part of it is I am who I am, but I have a hard time thinking that many North Dakota constituents have a hard time getting a hold of their lawmaker if they're really coming with a serious issue. And my problem is that when we clutter up the process with nonsense, we incentivize moving away from such an open, such a thorough process. And we move more towards some things that maybe we don't like, which is maybe committee chairs able to just kill bills in committee. Maybe we move towards a full-time legislature if we want to fill up the time with a lot of nonsense. I don't think those are things voters want, but I mean, you got to remember, it worries me that I always feel this way too about open records requests when I hear people just abusing it, right? Just making one
worried
request
that a good
after
thing
another.
We have, bad faith takes on a good thing we have being a smaller, more local state
is going to give.
And I actually think part of that equation, I don't disagree with you that we are an open state, that you can look everything up. I think it is a bit convoluted for what I'm going to call a civilian, which is a little bit condescending, but someone who doesn't live in the world to look those things up. No, really,
fair.
truly, if you're working a full-time job that isn't law, that isn't the legislature, and you're in a business that then gets impacted by that one area, it is kind of hard to track. Where's that bill? Where to go? What committees are? What day is that being heard? It's not an easy thing to look up. What I'm saying is,
in a lot of for all the malignment they get. I mean, that's why a lot of these lobbyists and associations exist. If you're a certain type of business owner, one way to help with that, to understand what laws may be coming through the legislature that impact your business, is you join whatever relevant association is relevant to your business, and they have lobbyists in Bismarck who keep track of that stuff.
I think the legislature would do itself a service, though, by making that website even more intuitive. The new legislative website, I don't like very much. I don't
like it. Maybe part of it's just I was so used to finding things on
the
old one.
I might be a cranky old man that wants it to be like it was in my day, but I don't think it's intuitive. A way to look those up. I think the legislature would do itself a service by making itself that much more easy to navigate. Make it as easy as it is to buy something on Amazon, to look up a bill. And when you have that transparency and people can see that, they can then see more clearly when a conspiracy theorist is jumping up and down talking about fluoride in the water or something. You know what? That's a waste of time. This guy's probably trying to talk about funding first thing. I think that's the more serious thing to be doing here.
Like when the legislature's in full swing and everybody's talking about a bill. I mean, you could have a full-time job just correcting people on Facebook, just linking them to the bill. That's not in there. Or that is in there, or whatever it is. I mean,
absolutely.
The misperceptions that circulate are not helpful to anybody. Well, we're going to wrap it up there. Ben, thanks so much for coming on. Ben's going to be joining me every Wednesday. It'll be a lot of fun because, like I said, Ben's got a lot of experience in the legislature, former lawmaker, and we're going to have a lot of good conversations coming up once we get into the legislative session, the regular session, which starts in January. Ben, thanks so much.
Thanks for having me on, Rob. Looking forward to it.
Did you know Forum Communications Company has a robust podcast library? At inforum.com/podcasts, we have everything from politics, sports, true crime, outdoor adventure, and more. Visit inforum.com/podcasts and explore them all today.